that the involvement of Mr. Tabani Zulu was necessary for this asbestos project to get off the ground. He dealt with the budget issues and he also dealt with certain procurement issues. We know that.
Chair, I'm not sure about Mr. Zulu's involvement in procurement issues, but from the evidence that he presented here, it is apparent that his involvement was limited to the budget issues for the Free State project.
The suggestion that Mr. Pretorius is putting to you is whether one calls that involvement of Mr. Zulu limited or not, that it was necessary in order for this project to happen. Do you want to comment on that? In other words, without that involvement, limited as it may have been, the project might not have gone ahead.
Yeah, from the evidence that has been presented here, I
Yes.
would say that it was necessary. Yeah.
Okay.
Because he needed to approve the budget adjustment.
That's correct, Chair.
We know that Mr. Tim McKessie's involvement was necessary because he approved the project.
That's correct. He was
as head of department.
He was the head of the department, yeah, and ultimately the accounting officer in that department.
You had engaged with both of them. You corresponded with Mr. Zulu. You knew who he was.
I knew who he was, but do you want to clarify when you say that I corresponded with him? What you mean by that?
And maybe, Mr. Pretorius, at what stage are you
Correct.
talking about?
Yes, yeah.
Well, if you go to FS 8, page 110. That's a letter addressed to yourself from Mr. Zulu dated 7 April 2014.
Correct, Chair?
That deals with a procurement issue. Or it deals with a contractual issue.
Yeah, but can I just explain, sir, just so that we're on the same page? This letter was addressed to Blackhead Consulting for successfully being appointed onto the panel of the National Department of Human Settlements. So it's got absolutely nothing to do with the Free State. It's got everything to do with the panel for national. That's what it's meant for.
Okay.
But the only point that I'm making at this stage in relation to that letter is you knew who Mr. Tabani Zulu was.
Chair, I knew Mr. Tabani Zulu long before these letters were exchanged, in a personal capacity. So I knew who he was.
And you knew that he was involved in arranging for the release of funds, the budgetary issue.
Maybe talk about when, at what stage, Mr. Pretorius, when, at what stage did you...
During 2014.
Yeah. I was not, Chair, aware of what Mr. Zulu's role was going to be. You would recall that I indicated that my involvement at the beginning was to submit the proposal. And Chair, you would also recall that I also mentioned in this commission that Mr. Mpambani's role was to engage with the relevant people and officials in the Free State. Now, it was only much, much later that I got to know that the process that would have to be undertaken to make the budget available would include, amongst other things, a revision of the business plan by the Department of Human Settlements in the Free State, which business plan had to be approved by the DG, National DG. So in that context, I knew that his role was to make sure that it gets approved, but also to make sure that, the funding becomes available. But at the beginning, when we were doing the exchanges, I was not familiar with the mechanics of how this thing was going to happen, because I left that role specifically to Mr. Mpambani, who was running with it.
But then you would have come to know on your version, Mr. Sodi, of Mr. Zulu's involvement in 2015, 2016. You just said that you came to learn.
No, it was probably 2014 still that I...
It was still 2014?
Yeah, it was still 2014.
Okay.
All right, so as early as 2014 you knew that.
Yes.
And we know, and we'll deal with in a moment, a payment made to a motor dealer to pay for a deposit on a car to Mr. Tabani Zulu that he bought there.
Correct.
So you had all this knowledge at the time you were interviewed by the investigator?
That's correct. That's correct, yeah.
Although you didn't know that the investigators knew about the payment to the motor dealer. They hadn't told you that they had found this out.
Well, Chair, I dealt with the questions that were posed to me by the investigators. And as far as I'm concerned, I dealt with those questions comprehensively. Right. There may have been gaps here and there, but I certainly didn't do anything to conceal whatever information that may have been beneficial for the Commission. Right. Whatever that was posed to me, I responded.
When they asked you about the contents of the spreadsheet, and they asked you about the initials TZ, you expressed complete ignorance of. You said you had no knowledge of who that could be.
Well, Chair, I've said this earlier as well, that I can't with absolute conviction, Chair, confirm or make a speculation and reduce that into a fact to say that this initial refers to so and so, especially because I was not the author of the spreadsheet. We can get into probabilities to say, well, it's probable that this initial could mean so and so, but I can't, put my head on the block, Chair, and say definitely this initial refers to Mr. Tabani Zulu. That's basically what I said. Yeah.
Well, fair enough, Mr. Sodi. I don't think anybody in that interview asked you to put your head on a block or say anything with absolute certainty. They merely asked you about those initials. What you didn't do was say, well, it could be Tabani Zulu. I know he was involved in the project. It could be Tabani Zulu because I know I made him a payment.
Chair, that's correct.
Yeah. Let me just complete. Your answer wasn't full and frank. It was a simple bare denial of any knowledge. Correct.
That's correct, Chair. I did not want to speculate on the initials. I think, Chair, you'd understand that would have been a grave mistake, because if I speculate on initials and it turns out that the speculation is incorrect, I would have misled the Commission. I would have given them incorrect information. More so because I was not involved in putting it together. So So it would be difficult. If it was a full name, I would have said definitely, I think this, I can say that person refers, that name refers to this person. But it's initials that are on the spreadsheet. And one can make assumptions, but to absolutely say, yes, this is so-and-so, Chair, would have been difficult for me.
As I understand it, there was a transaction in respect of which you used the initials TZ to refer
That's
to
correct.
Mr. Ezulu. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah. So it would appear, therefore, if one looks at that fact and the fact that in a spreadsheet that your partner, Mr. Mbambani, meant for both of you, he used the initials, he also used initials TZ. It seems likely that the two of you could have been talking about the same TZ. I'm saying likely.
It's possible.
I'm not saying certainly.
Correct, Chair.
You would accept.
I accept that, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there another person with those initials that you know both of you knew?
Not that I know of, Chair.
Yes. The
Yeah.
only person with those initials that both of you knew is Mr. Zulu.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
All right. Well, when asked about it, and I'm referring to FS6, page 325, in your interview with the investigators, you were asked the question, TZ, who is TZ? Your answer was quite straightforward, Mr. Sodi. I have no idea. You were asked again, you've got no idea. Mr. Sodi, no. TZ, who is TZ? I have no idea. So the answer was, as you like to put it, absolute. You did put your head on a block and say, I have no idea. But you did have an idea who it could be.
Chair, I was avoiding making speculative answers to very specific questions that were posed to me. And that's how I answered it. That I couldn't give a speculative answer because I didn't know that indeed that initial, or those initials rather, refer to the same person that I also happen to know as TZ.
Well, at the very least, I think you fairly conceded that it was within your knowledge and capacity at that stage to assist the investigators by telling them about your involvement with Mr. Zulu, Mr. Zulu's involvement in the project, and the payment you made to Mr. Zulu.
What's the question, Mr.
You could have
Chair?
said that at that stage. You could have
He's-
said, I can't
he's-
be certain, I don't want to speculate, but to assist you, I can tell you these things.
If my memory serves me well, I seem to recall that I could have mentioned, and we can look at the transcript, that Mr. Tabani Zulu was a DG at National. I could have said that he was a DG because I knew that he was a Director General at the National Department of Human Settlements. But I would have answered questions that were posed to me, and I would have given specific answers to those particular questions.
Well, we can argue semantics for a long time,
Yeah.
Mr. Sodi, but at that time you knew a person with the initials TZ. You knew a person with the initials TZ who had been involved in facilitating the project. And you knew a person with the initials TZ to whom you'd made payment.
That's correct, sir.
Your answer, however, in the interview was, I have no idea.
Because the question that was posed to me, Chair, was, do you know who is TZ? And based on the spreadsheet that was presented to me, which, as I had indicated, I was seeing for the very first time. Now, I did not want to speculate that the TZ that was on the spreadsheet, with an amount next to it, definitely referred to the TZ that I knew to be the Director General of the Department of Human Settlements. And I was responding to that question in that context. And if maybe the question was posed to me to say, you know, or maybe an additional question to say, do you know anyone who has the similar initials as TZ? I would have said yes. I would have confidently said yes. I know a person who's got those similar initials. But that question was not posed to me.
Well, you will ask later in the interview, but the bottom line is it can't perhaps be Tabani Zulu. You say, I don't know, I don't want to make speculations. You've confirmed that now.
That's correct, yeah.
But you insisted that you had no idea. The simple proposition I want to put to you is that there was much more information you had about a person called TZ, involvement in the project, recipient of payment, that you could have given at that stage.
Chair, I take that. You know, sometimes when in this kind of situations where, you know, questions are posed, you want to be as honest as you can and answer the questions and you know, not be all over the place and end up answering things that you shouldn't be answering to. So I was assisting the commission and the investigators in dealing precisely with the questions that they posed to me.
TM, the next name on the list, you knew Mr. Makesi as Tim Makesi. We've established that.
That's correct, Chair.
Again, you said you had absolutely no idea of, well, you didn't say absolutely, you said I have no idea in relation to who TM was. But again, we know he was involved in the project.
That's correct.
His involvement was necessary in order to bring about the project.
Correct, Chair.
And he entered into a joint venture property investment with you on your version after the conclusion of the project.
That's correct, Chair.
Again, information which you knew at the time and could have given to the investigator.
Again, Chair, I dealt specifically with the questions that were posed to me, and I was not evasive in responding to those questions. I responded to those questions, and that's how the process went. And I cooperated fully, and I gave them as much information as I could based on the questions that they asked me.
AM, could you have guessed who that was?
Absolutely not, sir.
You knew who the Premier was at the time?
I knew who the Premier was, but Chair, I wasn't going to, again, start speculating that AM refers to the Premier.
We don't have any evidence that he was directly involved in the project, although there's other evidence that he gave instructions that all procurement issues were to be sent to his office. But that's not something that concerns you for the moment. OM, did you know an Oli Mlameli?
Not at all, Chair, I don't.
MEC, could you guess what that stood for?
Absolutely not, Chair.
Member of the Executive Council?
It could mean that, Chair. I don't know whether it's an initial for someone's names, or whether it actually refers to what Mr. Pretorius is alluding to.
Right, and just at the bottom, above 2013, 2014, Diedrichs, you knew a person called Diedrichs, and you knew that Diedrichs had some involvement with the procurement aspects of the project. Correct?
That's correct. The Diedrichs that I knew was the acting HOD at the Department of Human Settlements in Gauteng, whose role was limited to confirming that Blackhead Consulting was indeed part of the PRT panel in Gauteng. And that is evidenced by the letter that we've dealt with that was sent to the Department of Human Settlements. So to call it involvement in procurement, I think would be overreaching. I wouldn't say that she was involved in procurement, but rather just mere confirmation that this company that you're referring to, Mr. Mkesi, is indeed on our panel. And that's what happened.
Yes, perhaps my shorthand can be subject to that comment. I accept. But we know the extent of her involvement. We've traversed it in full in evidence.
Okay.
But just to clear something with me, I thought at some stage the evidence was that the permission of the Gauteng's Department of Human Settlements was required by the Free State Department of Human Settlements for that department to, so to speak, participate in the Gauteng contract to the extent that that is what was contemplated to be done. Is that not your understanding?
Well, Chair, I wouldn't call it permission.
Yeah.
What happened in this case was a request to confirm. It was, can you confirm that this entity has done work in your department or is on your panel?
Okay.
And so that
So
letter
that's the
was
confirmation
it's a
that was sought.
confirmation. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was sought.
Well, we can get the letter out, but again, confirm, give permission. It's a semantic debate. The law required her to authorize the participation in the contract by Free State in the Gauteng contract. Of course, we also know that none of these efforts and participation actually resulted in a lawful and proper participation, but that's a legal argument again, which we will
Correct.
spare you. Is it coincidence then that at least as far as TZ, TM and Diedrichs are concerned, that they are all people who had to some degree or another an involvement in the facilitation of the contract with the joint venture? Mere coincidence. You couldn't have put two and two together.
I mean, it's a coincidence, but again, I wouldn't want to speak with authority on a document that I had no role in drafting. But I hear what you're saying, that there is a coincidence there, that there is a name there and there are initials, and these initials, they appear to be similar to initials of people that are involved in the process.
They're not similar. They are exactly the same initial.
Correct.
Yes. Had you seen this at
I'm
the time?
sorry, Mr. Pretorius. Let me take that one step further.
Yeah.
You've got TM, or you've got two TZ. No full name is given, just the initials.
Yeah.
You've got TM, no full name is given, just the initials. We leave out AM and OM and MEC. And then you've got Didrix, just the same name is given, no name. What are the chances that it's just mere coincidence, not a single one of these initials, TZ and TM and this Didrix, not a single one of these initials and this name, this surname, refers to the people who each had such an important role in this project?
Thank you for the question, Chair. You'd recall that I had mentioned here that if I had gone through this spreadsheet when it was sent to me, I would have been inquisitive. I would have called Mr. Mpambani and said, Mr. Mpambani, I want to understand what is going on here. And I'm sure that he would have given me some explanation because he authored the document. I'm sure you'd have explained. I'm sure you'd have had some explanation. But as it turned out, it never happened. And only later on when I received the spreadsheet, I then said, but what's going on here? But then it was too late because Mr. Mpambani was normal. So I did not have the opportunity to then go to him and say, listen, I'm seeing this spreadsheet, and it's got entries which I do not understand. Can you explain what they mean? You know.
Can I take what you say, what you have just said, as meaning that if you had seen these names, if you had seen the spreadsheet and seen these initials, TZ, TM, and Didrix, that in your mind you would have thought of Mr. Tabani Zulu, Mr. Mukhetsi, and Didrix. That doesn't mean necessarily it would be them.
Correct.
But because they were important role players, that's what probably would have come to your mind and you would have asked him.
Absolutely, and I would have wanted him to verify that.
Yes.
You know, to say, please verify.
Yes.
Because I can make speculations.
Yes, yes.
But seeing that you're the one who authored this,
Yes.
can you please verify?
Yes.
You know, and then he would have been able to do that, I
Yes.
suppose.
You see.
But also the other problem, sorry, Chair, the other,
Yes.
I suppose, question that I would have asked was, but why all these amounts for these people? Why this? What do these amounts mean? You know, I would have asked that question. You know, and I'm sure you'd have given me an answer, and not that I would have agreed to the answer that you would have given me, but I wanted to know what do these amounts mean?
Yes.
You know,
And of course, what one notices is that on the spreadsheet, some names are written clearly. You know who they are talking about.
Yeah.
They refer to. And then these particular ones, it's just initials. And in regard to Didrix, it's just the surname. But she said, why is the full name not written just like Master Trade? Well, there's Martin, there's Steve, there's Rantwa. Not the full name, his names are written. But why are these on TZ
and
TM,
yeah.
and OM, and AM? Why are they not? Why is there no transparency about them?
Correct, Chair. And that's one of the questions that I would have asked. I would have asked him, you know.
And they happen, at least the initials that I've talked about, TZ, TM, and then of course Didrix. We know that on the project they happen to have important roles to play. And initials that coincide with their initials are written, not the full name.
Yeah.
There's no transparency about who these people are.
Correct.
Okay,
And
Mr.
Chair, but also other initials here that we don't know who they refer to, and next to them there is amounts, and I battle to understand what role they would have played in the project, you know, and that's what creates a difficulty for me to say, if you've got MEC, you've got, but what role did they play? You know, and that's what makes it difficult for me to understand, you know, why this would have been drafted with those kind of amounts.
Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you. We know that in March 2015, well, let's just summarize from the beginning. We know that you had a conversation with Mr. Mpambani, and his job was to create the spreadsheet showing all the expenses of the business.
That's correct, Chair.
Particularly the asbestos project.
That's correct.
We know that he went away and did that on your computer, or he stayed and did that on your computer.
That's correct.
He later in March sent you, March 2015, sent you an email referring to the spreadsheet, with a spreadsheet attached.
That's correct, Chair.
You knew that attached to those emails was a spreadsheet.
That's correct, Chair.
Your evidence in your statement and in your interview at the lowest seems to suggest that you looked at the spreadsheet. I would submit that it clearly says you looked at the spreadsheet. Your evidence today says you didn't look at the spreadsheet.
No, the evidence that I'm putting to the Commission today is that I did not look at the spreadsheet.
Well, firstly, I would suggest to you, Mr. Sodi, that it's improbable that that very document, which contains the income, your expenses, and your profit, would not be scrutinized by you.
Chair, remember I had already stated that before Mr. Mpambani put the figures that we had already discussed in a spreadsheet, that conversation had already taken place prior to him reducing it in writing on a spreadsheet. So I knew, so it wasn't something that was unknown to me. Chair, I knew what, as I indicated, what the total revenue of the project was going to be, and I also knew what the costs were going to be. So to answer Mr. Pretorius' question, that is improbable, I deny that because I knew upfront what the expenses of the project were. So, so I didn't see it as being absolutely necessary to go through it, because already that we had discussed that and I knew exactly how much it was going to be.
Had you looked at it, and I would persist with the probability that you did look at it, you would have seen, as the chair has pointed out, a list of initials and then some names. The legitimate payments, the names are in full, and the payments where there are initials had nothing to do with the conduct of the business, if these payments were to be made.
Had I looked at it, Chair, I would have asked Mr. Mpambani questions about it. Had I looked at the spreadsheet.
But as you sit there,
yeah,
and knowing what the costs of, or maybe let me put it, as you sit there, are you able to say there is no TZ, or there is nobody with the initials TZ who was entitled to be paid any legitimate money from the business? Or are you saying there was?
Chair,
You know of no person with those initials who had a legitimate claim to
absolutely,
any payment.
absolutely, Chair.
Is that the same you give the same answer in regard to TM.
That's precisely the correct, Chair.
Yes. And AM.
Correct.
And OM.
Correct.
And MEC.
That's correct.
And Diedrichs.
And Diedrichs.
That's correct.
And to the extent, or rather, let me put it, to the extent that JT is not Jimmy Dow, then you'd give the same answer.
Correct, Chair.
But if JT is Jimmy Dow, your version is that he had an entitlement to payment, not necessarily out of money from this project, but you owed him some money for something unconnected with this project.
That's correct, Chair.
But if JT doesn't refer to Jimmy Dow, you are saying there is no JT who had a legitimate entitlement to being paid.
Absolutely. And I would have asked Mr. Mpaban, who are these people? You know, and why are they appearing in this spreadsheet?
Yes.
And for what reason do they need to be paid?
Yes.
You know, I would have posed those questions.
Yes.
You know, but as it turned out, by the time that I got to be made aware of the spreadsheet, he wasn't there to answer those questions.
Just looking at those particular initials and details, it appears to me that to the extent that the spreadsheet may have reflected an intention that those people must be paid those amounts, it would seem that your partner, on your version, you are saying your partner knew of about X number of people who had to be paid more than 25 million rand from the business, and you knew nothing about those people. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, but can I just add to that? I mean, what we prepared, Chair, to give to the Commission are two things. Is a reconciliation of the affairs of the JV account. That reconciliation, Chair, will show how much came into the business and how much was paid out to who. We've already done that exercise, so it's easily available to transmit that information as soon as possible. Further to that, I'm willing, and we spoke about it earlier, to provide information relating to the affairs of Blackhead Consulting. And you will notice that from the JV account and from Blackhead, we had not made any of those payments at all to those people that are alleged to, to be the recipients of these monies that are reflected on the spreadsheet. But I've said as well that in as far as the affairs of Diamond Hill, I'm unable to confirm whether there would have been any transactions from that side to perhaps any of the people that are listed on the spreadsheet.
Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
One can conclude reasonably from this that where legitimate payments are made, one sees a name, and where payments that have nothing to do with the proper operation of the business are apparently to be made, initials are used. The intent of that is to conceal.
Chair, I can't speak to that because
what Mr. Pretorius is doing is to putting to you the conclusion he arrives at on interrogating what was being done here, to give you a chance to say, I agree with that conclusion. There must have been an intention to steal, or to say, no, but I don't think necessarily so. I think that there might not have been an intention to steal, or there was no intention.
Conceal, sorry.
Conceal, I'm
conceal,
sorry.
yeah.
Well, conceal and steal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, so he's giving you that chance to say, when you look at this, what what do you say about that conclusion?
Yes.
Well, I would agree with that, you know, just a mere reflection of the initials, you know, would in any way imply someone is trying to conceal something. So I would agree with that,
Okay.
that version.
And in any event, you would know as a businessman, Mr. Sadi, that this is an extraordinarily unusual way of recording the expenses of a business.
Absolutely.
But we also know that this document was only intended to be between yourself and Mr. Mpambani. Just won't find its way into any official record of the finances. Wasn't intended to.
Chair, I don't know what Mr. Mpambani's intentions were. I mean, this document, as far as I know, and I could be wrong, was produced by Mr. Dukwana. So the question that I have is simply this. How did Mr. Dukwana come to be in possession of this document? Where did he get it from? So those are the questions that I've been asking myself. And I was wondering, could Mr. Mpambani have shared this document with someone else? I could be wrong, but I think Mr. Dukwana did concede here that he knew Mr. Mpambani, that they knew each other at a personal level. So the question I have is it probable that Mr. Mpambani could have shared this document with Mr. Dukwana? And if that was the case, what would have been the reason for that? I don't have answers to those questions. So it would be important to know, for my sake at least, how he got to have access to this document, what he knows about it, and how was it shared with him. You know what I'm saying? Those are some of the things that I would be inclined to know. You know, maybe it could solve some of the answers that we have.
I may have misunderstood, but I was under the impression that you had accepted that the spreadsheet we are looking at is the spreadsheet that Mr. Mpambani prepared and emailed to you, which you said you didn't
interrogate.
Look at.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you accept that, I don't see why it's relevant whether Mr. Mpambani shared it with Mr. Dukwana for purposes of Mr. Pretoria's question. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
If you accept that it is the one, it's different if you say you are putting that in dispute. But if you accept that it is the one,
Yeah.
then the fact is, here are names that were put in and initials that were put in by Mr. Mpambani.
Correct, yeah.
Meant to have a meaning to you,
Yeah,
his partner. You see?
I get you.
Yeah.
And we know, of course, some of the contents of the spreadsheet contain information that you gave to Mr. Mpambani.
That's correct, yeah.
So would it be correct to say the spreadsheet does contain all the costs of the business as you expected them to be reflected in the spreadsheet that Mr. Mpambani was going to prepare, but that it contains also other costs
Additional information, which, yeah.
which you say you knew nothing about.
That's correct, yeah.
So it has everything that you expected. But
That's
it has
correct.
more.
It has more.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And what is more is you accept is would have been illegitimate payments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's common cause, it seems. I'm moving on to a new topic now, Chair. I don't know how 20 past. Yes, sure. Okay. Let's see how we go with these three issues that remain. And perhaps we could do the rest by way of written question and reply. So I would actually appreciate an opportunity to complete today.
Okay. How far
Well,
do
no,
you want to
let me
go?
not be too bold, DCJ. Let's reassess at 20 past.
Okay, all right. Okay.
It's common cause, Mr. Sodi, that you effected a payment of 600,000 rand to a motor dealer
I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Pretorius. I just thought of something that I want to put to Mr.
Sure.
Sorry. Danger or extraordinary. That a document that both you and Mr. Mbambani agreed he should prepare for your purposes, the two of you. When it comes to the names that are there, you seem to know only the people whose payments would have been legitimate, and you don't know a single one of those whose payments seem to have been illegitimate. And it seems Mr. Mbambani would have been the only one who knew all of those.
I want to make sure that I answer your question properly.
Do you understand the question? If you want me to repeat it, I will. But
Yeah.
if you understand, it's fine.
Chair, Mr. Mpambani, as I've indicated on a number of occasions, did not conduct himself in accordance with the spirit of the JV on a number of occasions, and I've highlighted some of those occasions. So it's not improbable that he could have done something like this, but in a way to conceal, the intended beneficiaries, or the intended beneficiary, or it could have been for himself, So, and again, it's illustrated, and I'm asking myself that with this last payment that was supposed to be split between the two entities, which ultimately was not split, did he intend to use some of those funds to deal with the arrangements that he had? It's a question that I ask myself. That maybe this guy had his own arrangements, which he did not disclose to me.
But of course, if one looks at the spreadsheet,
Yeah.
it is clear that he did not intend to conceal these other payments from you.
That's correct.
Can you see that?
Yeah, I see that.
He did not intend to conceal these other payments to you.
Well, the
Otherwise, he would
fact
not
that he
include
used
them.
initials, Chair, I'm not sure whether, well, we agreed here, and I think we've admitted that it's seen as, or interpreted as concealing, who the actual beneficiary are supposed to be.
But that conceal is not necessarily conceal from you.
Yes.
Conceal from third parties.
Conceal from third parties. Yeah, because if I had, as I said, if I had opened the spreadsheet, I would have seen this, and he would have been able to then give me
And
answers.
you would have asked him.
I would have asked
And he
answers.
must have been prepared to tell you.
I'm sure he
who
would
they
have,
are.
exactly.
So there couldn't have been an intention on his part to conceal the identity of those people, I would imagine. Particularly because paying those people would be also reducing your profit that you would get, isn't it? Because if the costs are X, the two of you get 50% of what comes out. If the costs are higher than that, that eats into the amount that you will share between the two of you.
Chair, I can safely state here that even if you had given me an explanation, those people would not have been paid from the JV account or from Blackhead. As to what could have happened with his share of the profit, that would have been his, his own business, and he would have dealt with it. But definitely from my side, I would have said, I would have wanted answers to say, why would we make such large payments to these individuals? For what? Because, ultimately, it is reducing our profit margin. I would never allow that. It wouldn't have happened at all, even if I had asked him those questions.
Yes, Mr. Pretorius.
From that exchange, Mr. Sodi, between you and the chair, seems to me that interrogating that spreadsheet now, it would be reasonable to conclude that it contemplated illegitimate payments to people involved in the project.
I would agree with that version.
Just to return to the payment of 600,000 Rand to Mr. Zulu, and we know the route that the payment took to the motor dealer as deposit for a motor vehicle, that's all common cause.
Correct.
The question that has concerned the chair and the evidence leaders is how that alleged debt arose. The explanation is from Mr. Zulu and from yourself that money was owed by you to Mr. Zulu, an amount of 600,000.
That's
Tell us
correct.
how that debt arose, please. Yeah. How did that debt arise?
Chair, was asked this question, and in the affidavit, I responded to that question, and I said, Mr. Zulu owned a lounge in Pietermaritzburg. And over a number of months, I bought alcohol. A lot of it was ordered and delivered to my house in Durban, in Zimbabwe, specifically to replenish my bar. At the time, Mr. Zulu had indicated to me that he does not have credit card facilities, because I've been to the establishment a few times, I had a couple of drinks, and I would take most of it home, and I would order, just, as I said, to replenish my bar at home. In December of 2015, I had accumulated a bill of just over 600,000 rands. And he called me and he said, look, this is your bill that you've accumulated. I knew more or less that my bill was around that. And he said, this is the amount, this is the exact amount that we've accumulated. When are you intending to pay? I said, I've got funds as we speak. I can pay immediately if you provide me with the detail, with your banking detail. And then he said, look, I thank you for that, but I'm intending to purchase a motor vehicle at a certain dealership in Balito. And then he said, rather than pay to me, please pay directly to the dealership. I'm going to use those funds as a down payment for the vehicle. And I subsequently called the dealership, and they gave me the banking details, and I paid the 600,000. The balance, I think it was about 604,000 that I had accumulated as a bill. The balance of the 4,000 was paid in cash at his establishment. And that's really how this thing happened with the 600,000. So I was given a nominated account to pay into, and Chair, I didn't see anything wrong with it because it was monies that were due to him. And when he said pay it into this vehicle or into this establishment, I didn't see anything wrong with it. I paid it there.
Well, it was money due to the business, whoever that was owned by.
That's correct. It was money due to TZ Lounge.
One thing that strikes one as rather strange is this question of order and delivery. How far is Zimbali from Pietermaritzburg?
Probably, Chair, maybe 100 Ks or something like that. And I need to explain, why I would have ordered from Mr. Zulu.
I think Zimbali might be, did you say about 100?
I'm estimating about 100.
Probably more than 100, because Maritzburg to Durban is about 86, 85 kilometers. And as I understand, I think Mr. Zulu said his business is in the township. So that would add, I think, on the kilometers. Because as I understand it, you'd have to go to town first before you go to the township. But there might be routes that I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think your route would go through town.
Yeah.
So probably the distance certainly should not be less than 100, but could be more than 100 kilometers.
It's possible. It's possible. But I may need to add that I go to that area, Pietermaritzburg, from time to time. My son goes to school in that area. He's in boarding school. He's been in that area since about 2015. So I go there from time to time for parents' meeting, for sports activities, to go see my son. And in most cases, after having completed whatever it is, business that I do at school, I would drive past, Mr. Zulu's lounge. On a few occasions I've done that. And as I said, this was someone that I knew at a personal level. So going to his establishment was not unusual because it was going there to also see someone that I knew, and we get there, we interact, we have one drink or two, and in some cases I would have taken a lot of stock with me, okay, to the house. On a number of occasions, like I said, I took a lot of stock, some stock, and eventually the bill or the tab ran into that amount.
I think you said this was all in 2015, is that right?
This was in 2015, correct.
Over how long a period in 2015 would you say this happened? Did the first transaction, for example, maybe happen early in the year or all in the second half of the year?
Chair, I'm speaking under correction, but this could have been over a period of about 6 months or so.
Over a period of about 6
Plus
months.
minus, yeah. I mean,
Yes.
I admit that, it's many years ago, so I may not have a proper recollection as to exactly, but
Yeah.
it was over a period of time.
Yeah.
It was not a once-off thing.
Yeah.
It was over a period of time.
Are you able to say maybe it was on 3 or 4 or 5 occasions or once a month in 6 months, over 6 months?
Chair, there would have been occasions maybe in 1 month, maybe I've got 2 orders. Some month, probably 1. But I think the establishment probably does have records that we can get, and then we wouldn't be speculating because they can be able to produce those records and say, Mr. Sodi, you took so much of stock on this particular day. I'm sure that they may be able to assist us
Okay.
when it comes to that.
Okay. Mr.
Yeah.
Peters.
Well, what is unusual at the very least is to place an order for the delivery of liquor from a business over 100 kilometers away. Doesn't make much sense.
Well, Chair, this was a business owned by someone that I knew. So it wasn't just a business out of nowhere. It was owned by someone that I knew. And so it was, for me, also a way of seeing as being supportive to, to support the business of someone that I knew, call it acquaintance or friend. So, but also it's important to understand, as I said, that I would go, and I went on a number of occasions after having done whatever business that I was doing at my son's school. I would have gone past, maybe had a, something to eat, have a couple of drinks. Obviously, I was mindful of the fact that I still had to drive about 100 k's, so I wouldn't have taken, many. And but I would also listen. Let me take extra, so that I can have it at my house, and replenish my bar, as I said, in Zimbabwe. So it wasn't.
Would there have been deliveries by TV Lounge to your property in Zimbabwe, or did they put the liquor into your car each time?
It was always in my car. I always took the stuff with me.
In your car?
In my car, yeah.
It was not delivered?
No, it wasn't delivered.
By TV Lounge?
No. It's
Yes.
the stuff that I took with me on a number of occasions, as I've indicated.
Yes. Do you remember about what the minimum was that you took on any one of the various occasions? You took liquor worth about how much or something like that?
Chair, I would not remember the exact
I
details.
guess you never
but-
took anything less than 100,000 rand?
Chair, I know I like my holy waters, but but yeah, I mean, it could have been around there, Chair. I don't remember exactly, but it could have been around there. Those sort of prices. But it was substantial.
And is the position that the only time you paid TV Lounge for the liquor was when you paid the 600,000? Prior to that, you had not paid them anything?
No, prior to that, there would have been payments, but very small payments. Maybe I get there, have something to eat, have 1 or 2 glasses of scotch.
Yeah, not for something you take home.
Not for something that I took home. So those small amounts I would carry
Yeah,
cash.
okay.
I mean,
Yeah, but for what you took home,
for what I took, I
You only
certainly
paid-
couldn't be carrying that amount
you
of
only
cash.
paid when you paid 600,000.
That's correct, yeah. Because it was large quantities, and
Okay.
I would not take a risk of carrying that amount of cash.
Yeah.
More so because, as I said, his facilities at the time that I've been there were not functioning.
Yes.
So I wouldn't have carried that amount of cash. So
Yes.
because there were large quantities, I would have said, listen, put this in my boot, and they would record whatever it is that I've taken and the amounts, and I take it with. And that happened, as I said, on a number of occasions.
Mr. Pretorius.
I recall you saying that TZ Lounge delivered to your property in Zimbabwe, and when the difficulty with that was pointed out, I now understand you to say that each time you took it in your car.
Chair, I recall that the stock was taken with me. I took the stock with me in my car.
All right, that's not a delivery, that's a
Correct.
purchase, out and out purchase. But you say this would have happened over a period of 6 months or less?
Again, I don't want to be,
You say more or less.
I say more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah. to
And
that.
you say more or less once or twice a month?
No, I'm saying that there were certain months where, I may have taken 2.
But otherwise once.
Otherwise, it would be maybe once in a month.
So that means that on any one trip from Pietermaritzburg to Zimbabwe, you would have carried between 80,000 and 100,000 rand worth of liquor.
That's absolutely correct, Chair. That's correct.
Extraordinary. Anyway, I've taken a few
it is
modest
correct.
deliveries recently, but the volume of
No,
the
Chair.
Okay, then let him say, I think he wants to
I
qualify something.
don't want to say this in a manner that's going to sound, arrogant. But, there are certain types of alcohol which are pricey. I've recently, and as recent as, I think 2 weeks ago, bought 6 bottles of champagne, which I don't consume all the time, but I put them for special occasions, especially birthdays and stuff like that. And I paid, it was between 4,000 and 5,000 per bottle. But as I said, this happens once in a while. It's not something that happens all the time. But I did that because, for instance, I know my birthday is coming, so I would acquire, 4, 5, or 6. In this case, I bought 6 bottles. I paid over 50,000 rand just for 6 bottles. So the point I'm trying to illustrate, and as I'm saying, Chair, I don't want it to come out in a boastful or arrogant manner, is to say there are certain types of alcohol that you'd pay exorbitant prices. And also, I'm an avid collector of whiskies. I collect not to consume, but it's just once in a while when, for instance, maybe there is a celebration or something, then you open one bottle. But it happens that, you get some of these bottles that are pricey. But otherwise, on a normal day, Chair, on an ordinary day, I'll have a glass of, or a bottle of wine that I buy from Woolies for 90 rands or 150 rands, on a normal occasion. But you do get, certain types of alcohol where you'd pay a lot of money.
Would there be certain types of liquor that are kind of popular with you that would have been included in those, I don't want to say deliveries because you have now said you took this yourself.
Yeah.
But whenever you took I assume there would have been certain types that are common and would be found on each time you did those trips.
Yeah. So, Chair, there would have been a substantial amount of champagne. There would have been, Chair, there would have been whiskeys such as your Johnny Walker, for instance, from your red up to your blue. And it's important that I illustrate this point, Chair, that, I network a lot and I entertain a lot. So it often happens that, when you're entertaining, someone comes, the chair might come and say, Mr. Sodi, I prefer, a Johnny Walker Gold or Johnny Walker Blue. That's what I prefer. And I would have to cater for that, Someone might come and say, no, I'm happy with a Castle Light or a Heineken, so it's just to cater for different types of people. Sometimes it doesn't mean that it will be consumed, but it's there, for occasions or days when someone is there and they, and they want it.
Mr. Pretorius?
Just for the record, Mr. Zulu, when he gave evidence, said there were times he delivered alcohol to you as well.
I don't recall that. This, as I said, I don't want to sound evasive, but this is a thing that happened 2015. We are in 2020 now, so memories fade over time. But I can certainly say that I bought the alcohol myself. There was probably one or two occasions where he would have visited me, but maybe he would have his own bottle that he gets, he comes to the house with, and he will have that bottle, because maybe he prefers that, what I'm saying. But I don't recall him bringing a delivery, to the house.
It does seem that you initially used the word delivery. You then said no every time it was you taking it away from the premises. Now you're saying there might have been times when you did deliver.
No, I'm saying that I do not recall any deliveries, Chair. I recall taking the items myself and driving with in the boot of my car to my residence. That's what I recall.
Let's deal, if I may go on, Chair.
On to another topic?
Yes.
Okay, before you do that, part of what strikes me as rather odd, Mr. Sodi, in regard to this issue of the debt to Mr. Zulu, that the payment of this large amount of 600,000 is not paid into his account, is not paid into the business account, but it's paid to a third party. So it won't appear in his account, it won't appear in his business account. And then we are told that you were owing him 604,000 rand. You pay 600,000 rand into a third party's account. And then when it comes to the payment of this 4,000 rand that remains outstanding after that, it's also not paid into his account. It's paid to him in cash. It's like all the time that nothing must go into his account.
Chair, it was paid in cash because at that time there were no credit card facilities. So the only other method of payment would have been either a transfer or cash. But here we're talking about 4,000 rand, which was outstanding, which I had with me in cash. And I thought, instead of transferring 4,000, why don't I just pay it in cash? And that's what happened. But if it was a large amount, I probably would have said, look, I don't have the cash, let me transfer it. But it was a small amount, and I'm saying it with the greatest of humility that we know we're in a country where there's a lot of poverty and so forth, So someone sitting at home listening to me saying that 4,000 was a small amount might take an offense to that. But I'm saying in relation to carrying the cash with me, it wasn't that substantial.
Well, what also seems, what would seem to be unusual to me is that, well, I've never seen Mr. Zulu's business TV lounge. I don't know how it is, but is it the type of business where the owners can afford to allow such a large amount of money to be owed to it without saying, hey, you must pay. We are not a big business. To us, 20,000 rand is a lot of money. It ended up being owed 600,000 rand over 6 months.
Chair, I certainly wouldn't know the turnover of the business or how busy they are, but I can certainly speak to the number of occasions that I was there. It was very busy, sir. And if the number of patrons or people that one would find in an establishment like that, if one could make a correlation between that and the sort of, revenue that you could make, I would conclude that based on my observation, at least on the number of occasions that I was there, it was a very busy place. But I wouldn't know how much they were making. But it was certainly quite busy, and I presume that it was a successful business based on that.
Okay. Mr. Pretorius.
I understood you to say that at the time you paid the 4,000 rand, there were no credit card facilities at TZ Lounge. Well, I didn't understand you to say that. You said that.
On the day that I paid, on a number of occasions when I was there, credit card facilities were not functioning, and that's what was confirmed to me. The balance of the 4,000 what I was paid, I don't remember if I asked, are they now functioning? Is your credit card facility now functioning, or is it still not functioning? I had the cash with me, and I simply just paid. But I can't say on that specific day that, the facilities were working or not working. But I had the cash with me, which, as I said, was not a substantial amount of money, and I used that to settle the outstanding balance, Chair, that I had there.
Mr. Sodi, your statement was clear. You said there were no credit card facilities, and you paid in cash.
Chair, I'm qualifying my statement. I say, on the number of occasions that I was there were no credit card facilities. I'm not changing that statement. But what I'm saying as well is, on the day that I paid the balance of the 4,000, I cannot recall if they were I don't remember if I asked them whether those credit card facilities were there or not there. I don't remember that. But I had the cash with me, and I paid the cash, the 4,000 with me. And that's what I'm saying.
Well, all I'm pointing out to you is that your evidence has changed in the last 5 minutes. But be that as it may,
Well,
Mr.
just
Zulu,
1 second, Mr. Pretorius. Please don't forget the point you want to make.
Yeah.
I understood Mr. Pretorius earlier on to be saying your previous evidence, I don't know whether in an affidavit or here, was that, or last time, was that you didn't pay when you took the liquor on the days that you took it, because TV Lounge did not have credit facilities. And I understood you just a minute ago to be confirming that that actually was the position. What you don't know is whether on the day you paid the 4,000 rand, whether that was still the case.
Absolutely correct, Chair.
So on all the days when you took liquor, you know that there were no credit facilities. It's only in regard to the day you paid the 4,000 rand that you are not sure.
That's absolutely correct, Chair. I mean, on those days where I took the liquor, large quantities of liquor, I always carry my wallet with me. I always carry my credit card with me.
Yeah.
And I can safely confirm that had they had those facilities, credit card facilities, I wouldn't have ran a bill at all. I would have simply, you know, paid with my credit card. So we wouldn't have had this scenario that we are dealing with now, where there is a tap of over 600,000 rands, which ended up, you know, with me getting a nominated account to say pay there. It wouldn't have happened at all.
Okay.
Perhaps this is not an issue to take up much more of our time, Mr. Sodi, but do I understand you correctly now to say that had there been credit card facilities at the time that you visited TZ Lounge, you would have paid by credit card?
That's precisely what I'm saying, Chair.
Because as I understand Mr. Zulu's evidence, he said he said there were credit card facilities there. He didn't specify the time, but we can establish that independently.
That's fine.
Let's just deal, if we may, with Mr. Mukesi and the arrangements entered into with him. We know, and I do not believe it to be in dispute, that you paid an amount of 660, was it? Just get the exact amount. 660,000 rand to a trust.
It was 650,000 rand to, not to a trust, but it was paid into the lawyer's account that we're registering the property that we
You say a
bought.
law firm's account.
Correct.
Did you say it was paid into a law firm's
Yeah,
account?
it was. That's correct.
Or those would have been the conveyancers?
I think those were the conveyances. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In any event, the money went towards the purchase of a property.
That's correct, Chair.
The property was purchased, as I understand your evidence, as an investment in property jointly between yourself and Mr. Mukesi through his trust.
Chair, that's correct. Let me just give context to this. When we started implementing the project, I obviously got to know the HOD. We met on a few occasions. And on one occasion, I can remember particularly, we spoke about just about everything, including business and our personal lives, and what I do and so forth. So he was aware that I, apart from the consulting engineering space, I mentioned that I'm into property, I'm a property investor, both commercial and residential. But I also remember vividly that I mentioned to him that I was looking at acquiring a property, a small holding, a small farm in Parys, in the town of Parys. So he was aware about my background when it comes to that. And in around April or March, somewhere between March and April of 2015, we had another chat, and he said to me, look, there is a new development in the Free State that has been launched. And his question was, is this something that you would look at from an investment point of view? because I'm looking at investing. But I'm also looking at a partner who can invest with me. And I asked him for the details of where this development was. Gave me the details. I looked at it. I mean, I consider myself to be fairly knowledgeable, you know, to some extent when it comes to property. So I did my research, and I thought, you know, this could be a potentially profitable investment. So the agreement was that he is able to raise a portion towards the acquisition of that property, which was about R1 million. And I raised the balance of 650,000. And he said this would be done, so his investment will be through the trust, Lekemo Family Trust. So he gave me those details because we subsequently had to get a contract signed between Blackhead Consulting as well as Lekemo Family Trust. That was signed. The money from my side was paid into the account of the conveyancing attorneys, and the property was acquired by the Lekemo Family Trust. The terms of the commercial transactions, as I said, were reduced in writing. I've got a copy of that. But this chair was a perfectly legitimate and above-board transaction or commercial transaction that we entered into. It was done, as I said, immediately, not long after the project was completed. And, you know, but when the question was posed to me about this transaction, and I could understand that when one looks at it from a distance, but also for me in hindsight, that it could be perceived to be, you know, it could be perceived to be problematic. But it was something that was documented. It was recorded in our books as an investment. In our financial books, it was recorded there. The transfer was made from Blackhead Consulting, so it was not concealed at all. And that's what happened. If this was meant to be some kind of an underhanded payment, chair, we wouldn't have done it the way we did. We wouldn't have recorded this in our financial records. We wouldn't have paid and left any paper trail. We wouldn't have done these contracts that we did. So it was a perfectly legitimate above-board commercial transaction which we entered into with the trust.
Well, we have the agreement between Blackhead Consulting Pty Limited and the Lekemo Family Trust, which we know for all intents and purposes is Mr. Makesi's trust. You're quite correct. It looks perfectly legitimate and proper. But if there was an illegitimate payment, this is a perfect disguise.
Well, it could be a disguise, but this was not the case in this particular transaction, Chair. It wasn't the case.
Where is it again?
It's FS 189. You see, if I may just, Chair, while you're doing
Yes, you
that.
may continue. But
I don't understand
one-
your logic. If
I'm sorry?
this,
It's 89, the page, not 189.
yeah, Free State 1, page 89.
Yeah, no, I was going
I
to page
apologize.
189. Okay, all right, continue.
Yes, just the logic of your last answer. If it was an illegitimate payment, one wouldn't want to make it look illegitimate. One would want to make it look legitimate. And this is the perfect way of making it look legitimate. You create a trust and you enter into an agreement and it looks like a joint investment.
Chair, if one had an intention of making an illegitimate or corrupt payment, I would have done it differently.
How would you have done it?
About a week ago, we had evidence being led in this commission about the famous plays in Saxonwold and how those sort of transactions happen. I would have done it in that manner, Chair. If it was illegitimate and improper, that's how I would have done it. It would have been.
But that evidence related to a situation where, on the face of it at least, the people who are implicated are yet to give evidence and give their side of the story, but on the face of it, seems that there was an intention, there was no intention that it should be seen by anybody outside of the people involved. So you have one way of concealing, namely, nobody must see what happened. Another way of concealing is people must see what happened, namely, that some payment was made, but they mustn't see, they mustn't recognize that it was an illegitimate payment. Therefore, in order to do that, put up an agreement that may seem legitimate. That's another way of concealing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I take that, Chair. You know, apart from, and this is what I'm saying, apart from the contract, I wouldn't have left paper trail like that. I wouldn't have done that. Because,
Of course, you could say, you could allow paper trail to be there if you were confident that anybody who saw the paper trail wouldn't be able to see that it was something illegitimate. Everything would look legitimate.
So I'm saying in my case,
Yeah, okay.
you know, if I had to do it, I would be a little bit more creative. And I'll do it in such a manner that, Chair, it won't be found. And it will never be picked up. That's what I would have done. I wouldn't have gone to an extent of even getting it recorded in our books, our financial books, to say there's an investment here. You know, I wouldn't have done that because it wouldn't have been an investment. It would have been an improper benefit due to someone for an improper relationship.
Well, Mr. Sodi, on your evidence, you're not an expert in this field, so...
I'm not. No, I'm not.
Well, I wanted to say, you speak with conviction that you would have done a better job.
I would have tried to do a much better job, Chair.
Okay.
I have a while to go, DCJ, so if you've no other arrangements, we can continue.
Well, if we should stop now, we can stop, but if you want to...
So perhaps I should just deal with another few issues, and then it would still be possible for the remainder to be dealt with in writing.
Yes.
So perhaps I should finish to avoid
Or
day.
maybe if you go further, let's not go beyond 15 minutes, because
Okay,
he's
let
going
me
to
see
come
how
back
far
anyway.
I can get in 15 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
The
Is that
invest-
fine, Mr. Sodi?
Yeah, he must just keep his questions short, Chair, and then we can deal with it.
You don't like his his questions.
If we add up the words, Mr. Sodi, I'm not sure who would win.
Okay.
Well,
Just-
but were you moving to another topic, Mr.
Yes, Chair.
Well, I want to ask Mr. Sodi something about this. Mr. Sodi, for me, this transaction involving this property, it looks very strange. As I understand the position, on your own version, you and Mr. Mufetsi agreed to go into a business venture involving a property. It's an investment, as you see it, and there's rent to be paid for, I think, 7 years, 6 years, 7 years. Is that right?
Yeah, so
At least initially.
so we agreed that we will, because these are long-term properties, usually a long-term investment. So we agreed that it will be kept for 7 years. As I said, it was a new development. So my knowledge is that, if it's a new development, give it a number of years. When it's almost fully developed, that's when you can sort of start realizing the upside. So it was the 7 year was actually my suggestion to Mr. Mukesi. And I said, look, I suggest we leave it for 7 years, because I anticipate that in year 6 or year 7, this area would be developed, and I think then we stand a better chance of realizing a better upside on the sale of the property. But the management of the property itself, in terms of rental and so forth, was left to the family trust. But in the agreement, it was very specific how that was going to be dealt with when it came to sharing the spoils, if one may put it that way.
But the property is registered in the name of the family trust.
Correct.
It is therefore owned by the family trust.
That's correct.
You don't own it yourself.
I don't
You are
own
not a
it.
joint owner legally.
That's correct, Chair. That's correct, Chair.
You have some agreement with Mr. Mofetsi on your version.
That's correct.
That's very strange to me. If the two of you are embarking on a joint business, why don't you create an entity in which you both have, whether it's 50% share each or whatever you agree upon, and that entity then owns the property. Then you have the same rights into the property as he does. Why don't you do that?
Chair, how we looked at this transaction was I had available 650,000 in my account. He didn't have the balance of the purchase price. So he had to go raise a bond. He said he had already spoken to his bankers and he qualifies. Or rather, he will stand surety on the trust for that amount, which is R1 million. So for me, it was easy, because, and I didn't want to complicate matters, because then he would go raise the bond for that amount, he will stand surety. I'm not involved there, but what covers me in the event of anything is the contract that we have, that we had signed. But also, I didn't see it as, as something that for me, I would want to stay in for the longest of time. The duration of 7 years, as I said, was agreed upon because I thought that is a realistic period in which we can be able to realize the upside. But I didn't want to own that property at all.
Well, that's strange for me, Mr. Sodi. You were looking at a property in which that would give you some returns in the future, an investment which would give you some returns in the future. You agreed to an arrangement in terms of which the exclusive owner of this property is somebody else. You are not there legally.
Correct.
That property, as I understand the position, if the trust was sued by somebody and they have to attach property, they could attach that property, isn't it?
That's correct, Chair.
Now, a business person like you, how does he agree to that kind of thing? That's what I'm struggling with. You put your investment in the name of some entity. You are not involved in terms of ownership. Some entity is fully, exclusively the owner, and you are fine with that. That doesn't seem to be something I would expect from certainly a business person that you seem to be.
Chair, this was not the only property where I had that kind of arrangement, for instance. But I've always relied on the fact that the contract had to be in place, between the transacting parties, so that if anything happens, I'm able to produce the contract and say, listen, I'm entitled to whatever share of this property. So if anyone had to go there and attach it for whatever reason, the contract that I've signed, and again, I'm not a legal person, but my view is that the contract that I've signed is enough for me to be able to recoup whatever that would be due to me. And that was the basis on which this was done. It was also not a it was not a sizable property. It was not a big property for me, where I'd have said, listen, there's too much at stake. The risk is too much for me not to be involved. So I didn't see any sort of risk in that, apart, as I said, apart from the fact that, I had made sure that the contract was in place. So I didn't see any risk in that at all. It was very clear, very specific. We invest in this for a period of this amount, and this is what is going to happen. But certainly with regard to, some of the properties that I've invested in, I would have taken a different approach because the amounts are substantial in some of those properties. So I'm sure I would have taken a different approach. Just to make sure that, one is covered at all costs because of the exposure. As business people, we always obviously weigh the risk. We look at the exposure, we look at the upside and those kind of things. So certainly in this case, I didn't have a problem at all. And I just felt that the contract was enough for me to cover me in the event of anything happening.
So the picture that emerges is that at least with two government officials who had some important role to play in regard to the asbestos project, namely Mr. Zulu and Mr. Mofetsi. With each one of them, you have some arrangement that has got some strange features, at least for me. With regard to Mr. Zulu, this large payment of 600,000 rand for liquor, and then with regard to Mr. Mofetsi, an arrangement in terms of which property is bought that you regard as property in which you are investing, but it's completely in the name of Mr. Mokgetsi's family's trust. And I think you say in your affidavit, the question of the rent was something you would see in 7 years when the property has to be sold. So with each one of them, there seems to be something quite unusual to me. You may wish to say something, or you may be able to say you accept that there are some unusual features, but that's how it happened.
Chair, if I had to be in your position, I'd probably have the same views.
Yes.
And maybe look at it that way.
Yes, yes.
So
You understand?
I understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the chair asked you a question about the structure of the agreement between Blackhead and the family trust. And perhaps it should be pointed out that your consideration that you were protected by this agreement is limited and must be qualified. You only had rights against a family trust if something went wrong. You had no rights in the property in which you supposedly invented or invested, right?
Chair, that could be the case. As I said, I'm fortunately not a legal person, so
Yeah.
if I consult with someone to assist me with a contract who's trained in such matters, I would believe that if they say this is a...
Was this agreement drawn up by a lawyer or just by yourselves?
It was drawn by ourselves, but if I remember, I think I specifically consulted. I can't remember with who. This is a long time ago, but I checked. You know, if the agreement was okay, and I think the answer that I got was that it looks fine.
Do you
Who
recall
drafted it?
whether it was typed in your office or in Mr. Mokgetsi's office?
Chair, I can't remember where it was drafted.
Yes.
But we would have shared it. Both of us looked at it before we signed it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But from this arrangement, it seems that you want to go into a joint investment in a property with Mr. Mokgetsi. You then enter into an agreement with a trust. You have no rights in the property. You only have rights against the trust, not even against Mr. Mokgetsi. The only person to have benefited from this arrangement and substantially benefited was Mr. Mokgetsi. He had the better part of the deal.
Well, Chair, like as I said, I was quite happy with the contract that we drafted. I was quite happy with the upside that we anticipated to get from the property. You know, because like I said, I saw it as a potentially good investment. And in as far as the advice relating to how I would be covered in the event of anything happened, I was confident that I was given proper advice. So, you know, it could be that maybe upon interrogation, when one looks at the contract, you say, well, you know, maybe it could have included this clause, or it could have been amended in this particular fashion. But we are having right now the benefit of hindsight to look at things, you know, in the past to say this could have been happened this way, you know, and you know, it is a benefit that we have now, you know, that we could have done things differently perhaps. Perhaps we could have specified in the contract as well that, you know, I've got something on the property as opposed to just the trust.
Well, you contemplated that there would be rental paid for
Yes.
the property
Correct.
prior to it being sold in 7 years' time from that time. as I understand one of your affidavits or the contract, the property was going to be sold after some years, is that right?
Yeah, so we had planned to keep it for a period of 7 years,
Yes,
and we had planned that upon the sale of the property,
in 7 years' time.
in 7 years' time, we would look at the value.
Yeah.
Obviously, that would be shared proportionately, whatever amount that we sell for, and then also would take into account the rental income that would have been earned. So that would be taken into account in calculating ultimately what's going to be shared between the two parties.
Is there somebody occupying the property at the moment?
Mr. Mkhosi is occupying the property as far as I know.
Is
Yeah.
occupied. Has he been occupying the property since the property
Ever
was
since.
acquired?
Correct, yeah.
Is he paying rent?
So there is rental which would be taken into account on the sale of the property, not right now. So that was the agreement, that would be taken into account after 7 years when we sell the property. So that, and there is you would see that there is a clause there that says it's 65,000 per annum, which is what we specified in the contract, which would be a portion of the rental income that will be payable to Blackhead Consulting.
So the payment of any rental would happen annually or would only happen at the end of the 7 years?
Upon the sale, at the end of the sale, upon the sale of the property.
Yes.
Yeah.
So rent would be accumulated.
It should be accumulated.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it would not be paid into any account. Is that,
No, so it should be accumulated per annum
Per
for a
annum.
period of 7 years.
Yes.
And it will be taken into account when we do the split.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr.
Well, we have the agreement here, and it's easy to answer those questions. Clause 2.5 says, Lekema shall be entitled to rent the property to whomever it so desires. It doesn't have to rent the property, but it may.
It may, yeah.
If it rents the property, those rentals are taken into account upon disposal of the property in 7 years' time.
That's correct.
But in the meanwhile, Lekemo can keep the rent.
That's correct.
And if it's not rented out, Mr. Mkhize himself can stay there.
That's correct.
There's no provision for him to pay rent in
That's
this
correct.
agreement.
That's correct.
Nor is there any notional rent that he must pay on disposal of the property. So he benefits. He's living rent-free.
It's the rental, as I said, Chair, would be taken into account. We specify the amount that is due to Blackhead Consulting per annum. But that would only be due upon the sale of the property, which would be in 7 years' time, as we stipulated. So even if he lived in the property for those years and not paid rent, at the end of the day, in 7 years' time, that would have been taken into account to say, listen, this is the amount that we agreed. And it's specified in the contract. It's there. That it's 65,000 per annum. So it would be taken into account when we're doing the calculations. So we can't say it was rent-free because it was going to be taken into account in the end when we're doing the split.
I'm afraid that's not what the agreement. The agreement says in paragraph 2.7, the property shall be sold by mutual agreement between the parties. If the property is not sold within 7 years from the date of signature of the agreement, then Lekemo shall pay Blackhead 650, its initial investment, its proportionate share of the rental income, less any expenses incurred for the maintenance of the property, and an amount equal to 65,000 Rand per annum in respect of the notional capital appreciation of the property. So it was contemplated that the value of the property would increase over the 7 years.
It was contemplated, yes.
So Mr. Mkhize could quite happily live rent-free for 7 years, and then at the end of the transaction, at the end of the 7-year period, pay the amount specified in 2.7 out of the sale of the property, the proceeds of the sale of the property. That's a benefit.
Well, the chair, the split would have to be determined according to the formula that we agreed. And what it means is that what would be payable to Blackhead Consulting would include what would have been the rent, which we specified as being 65,000 per annum, plus whatever upside. So if we were to sell the property for, say, 2.5 million, we would have minus the 1650 from 2.5 million, and proportionally split that amount between the two entities plus the rental income that would have been derived.
Sadly, that's not what the agreement says, Mr. Sodi. It says the 65,000 rand is in respect of the notional capital appreciation of the property. If the property is not sold, the property stays in the trust. Then what happens is you get your 650,000 rand back, a proportional share of the rental income, if there's rental income, and you get an amount of 65,000 rand to cover the capital increase of the property. But you don't have that because you're not selling it. If you sell the property, then you get your initial investment, you get the share of the capital appreciation, and then you get any rental income which is shared between the parties. That's what this agreement says. But it's not necessary to go into that fine detail and our differing understandings of what the terms are, Mr. Sodi. Save to say that Mr. Mkezi ultimately can live there rent-free and account only in 7 years' time.
Well, he would leave the chair rent-free for those years, but ultimately he's going to have to pay in retrospect after 7 years.
And
so for the first,
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. And he could do that out of the capital appreciation.
He will do that. The capital appreciation, chair, it's going to be split between the two entities. So I would have received my capital appreciation in proportion to what I would have invested, okay? And then he would have had his own capital appreciation. And he could have, based on his appreciation, then paid for whatever that is due to him. But it doesn't mean that, it would have been rent-free, because it would be taken into account at that point. But for the first years, yes, one can look at it that way. But ultimately, when we exit the deal, the transaction, he would have had to pay for the rental. So it wouldn't have been rent-free in that sense.
For 7 years, it would have been rent-free.
For 7 years, but ultimately, yes.
Out of the profits of the deal. He benefited. Obviously, it was a beneficial project. You're saying you didn't?
Because you don't normally get that, do you?
You don't normally get?
Get that kind of arrangement if you are leasing a property.
Yeah, I think in this case it would be different, Chair, because, like I said, there is a bond that he had raised, so he's servicing the bond with a financial institution. As far as I'm concerned, he's still servicing that bond. So I can't say that he's staying there rent-free, because there is a bond that he's servicing, and of course that was taken into account. He's going to have to service that bond, and only after 7 years, that's how we're going to be doing the split. It's on the basis of the agreement that we had signed. So there are monies that are payable by Mr. Mkhosi on a monthly basis towards the servicing of the bonds and the maintenance of the property and the rates and taxes and so forth. So that's why I'm finding it difficult to admit that he's staying there rent-free in that context.
But of course, you are having this arrangement with this person who made it possible for Blackhead to get this project because he approved the adjustment of the business plan. Is that right?
Correct, sir.
Yeah.
Chair, it's almost 6:30. I do have some questions, but perhaps they're better left for another day.
I think that's fine. We have ended up staying much longer than we had agreed, but I think that this will be helpful because next time you come back, Mr. Sodi, it will be possible to take a much shorter time to keep you on that seat for a shorter time than otherwise would have been the case. So we are going to adjourn now, Mr. Sodi, but arrangements will still be made after the investigation that must still happen, in which you have unequivocally given your undertaking to cooperate. After that has been done, an arrangement will be made for another date will be determined for you to come back to finish your evidence. You understand?
I understand, Chair.
Yes, okay. And thank you for everyone's cooperation, your legal team also for staying till this time, Mr. Pretorius and your team. We are then going to adjourn for the day. Tomorrow we'll have a sitting involving other witnesses, and we'll start at normal time, namely 10 o'clock. We adjourn.
All right.
You like seeing me here? You must have a